The dust hung thick in the air that October morning, when Elias Granger first laid eyes on the girl his neighbor was trading away. He had ridden over to the Hutchins homestead to discuss water rights. Nothing more, but what he witnessed changed the course of his life in ways he could never have imagined. Elias was 40, 2 years old, weathered by sun and loss, a man whose heart had grown as hard as the Texas soil he worked. His wife Mary had died 3 winters past, taken by pneumonia, and his only son had been killed in a senseless bar fight in Abilene 2 years before that. Since then, Elias had retreated into himself, speaking only when necessary, working from dawn until his hands bled, trying to exhaust himself enough that sleep would come without dreams. His ranch, once a thriving cattle operation, had dwindled to a handful of livestock and fields that grew more weeds than crops. Neighbors whispered that Elias Granger had given up on living, that he was just waiting for death to take him too. When he arrived at the Hutchins place that morning, he found Silas Hutchins standing in the yard with a portly cattle trader named McGrevy. Between them stood a girl of perhaps 16 or 17, heavy, set and round-faced, with eyes that seemed to hold all the sorrow in the world. She wore a dress that had been mended so many times, it was more patches than original fabric, and her dark hair hung in tangles around her shoulders. She kept her gaze fixed on the ground, her shoulders hunched as though trying to make herself invisible. "This here is my stepdaughter, Clara," Silas was saying, his voice carrying the false cheer of a snake oil salesman. "Strong as an ox, good worker, won't give you no trouble. I'm telling you, McGrevy, she'll earn her keep 10 times over." McGrevy circled the girl like she was livestock, nodding with satisfaction. "She'll do. My wife needs help with the younger ones, and this one looks like she can handle heavy work. You said a milk cow and $20. Silas nodded eagerly. "That's the deal. And I'm throwing in her blanket and spare clothes, such as they are." Elias felt something twist in his gut. He had seen many hard things in his life on the frontier, had witnessed cruelty and desperation in equal measure, but this struck him differently. The girl, this Clara, stood perfectly still, not protesting, not crying, accepting her fate with a resignation that spoke of long suffering. Her mother, Silas's wife, was nowhere to be seen, likely hiding inside, unable or unwilling to witness what she had agreed to. "Hold on," Elias heard himself say, surprising even himself. Both men turned to look at him. "I'll give you 2 cows and $40. Silas's eyes lit up with greed. "Well now, Elias, I didn't know you were in the market for hired help. I need someone to help run the house," Elias said, the lie coming easier than expected. "Place has gone to ruin since Mary passed. 2 cows, $40, and I'll take the girl off your hands." McGrevy started to protest, but Silas was already nodding. "Don't, she's yours, Granger. Come by tomorrow with the cows and we'll settle up." Elias looked at the girl, who had finally lifted her eyes to meet his. There was no gratitude in her gaze, no hope, just a dull acceptance of one fate being traded for another. "Get your things," he said quietly. "We'll go today. I'll bring the cows and money tomorrow." Clara disappeared into the house and emerged minutes later with a small bundle that apparently contained all her worldly possessions. She followed Elias to his horse without a word. He helped her up, then mounted behind her, and they rode away from the Hutchins homestead in silence. The ride to Elias's ranch took an hour. He could feel the girl's tension, the way she held herself rigid, as though bracing for a blow. He wanted to tell her she had nothing to fear from him, but the words felt hollow before he could speak them. What comfort could he offer? She had just been traded like an animal, first by her stepfather, then purchased by a stranger. Whatever hell awaited her at his ranch, she had no choice but to endure it. When they arrived, the place looked even more desolate than usual in the harsh afternoon light. The house was a simple 4-room structure, weathered and in need of repair. The barn leaned slightly to one side. Weeds had overtaken what had once been Mary's vegetable garden. Elias felt a flush of shame at bringing the girl to such a place. He helped her down from the horse and led her inside. The house was worse, cluttered with the debris of a man who had stopped caring. Dirty dishes were piled in the basin. Dust covered every surface, The air smelled stale and lifeless. "I know it's not much," Elias said. The first words he had spoken since they left the Hutchins place. "But you'll have your own room, and you'll be fed properly, and no one will raise a hand to you. That's my word." Clara looked around the house with those same empty eyes. "What do you want from me?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, rough from dessous or tears. "I want you to help me live again," Elias said, surprising himself with the honesty. "And maybe I can help you do the same." The first weeks were difficult. Clara moved through the house like a ghost, doing the work that needed doing but rarely speaking. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, organized the chaos, and began cooking proper meals. Elias learned that despite her silence, she was intelligent and capable. She could read and write, skills her real father had taught her before he died when she was 9. Her mother had remarried Silas within a year, desperate and alone, and life had become a series of small cruelties and large indifferences. "He wasn't always going to trade me," Clara told Elias one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. It was the most she had volunteered about her past. But his crops failed 2 years running, and he needed livestock. "My mother, she just got tired, I think. Tired of another mouth to feed, tired of Silas complaining about me. She stopped looking at me months ago." Elias felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "That's her failing, not yours. You understand that, don't you?" Clara shrugged, a gesture that spoke of deep wounds not easily healed. "I understand that I was worth less than a cow to the woman who bore me. That's a truth I'll carry always." As autumn turned to winter, something shifted between them. It started small, little moments of connection. Elias found himself talking to Clara about Mary and his son, stories he had locked away because they hurt too much to remember. Clara listened without judgment, and sometimes she would share her own memories of her father, of the time before loss had defined both their lives. One day, Elias came in from mending fences to find Clara baking bread, her face flushed from the heat of the oven, humming a tune he did not recognize. The sight stopped him in his tracks. There was something alive in her that he had not seen before, a spark that the cruelty of her circumstances had not fully extinguished. "You have a beautiful voice," he said. She startled, then blushed deeper. "My father used to say that. He taught me songs, old ballads from Ireland where his people came from. Would you sing one for me sometime?" She nodded, shy but pleased, and Elias realized that this girl, this young woman whom others had discarded, was becoming precious to him in ways he did not fully understand. Winter came hard that year, with blizzards that buried the ranch under feet of snow. They were trapped inside for days at a time, and in the forced proximity, they talked more. Elias told Clara about his dreams when he was young, before life had beaten the hope out of him. He had wanted to breed the finest horses in Texas, to build something that would last beyond his own life. Clara listened and asked questions that showed she understood not just what he said, but what he meant. "You could still do that," she said one evening as they sat by the fire, the wind howling outside. "You're not dead yet, no matter how much you might wish you were." The words were harsh, but her tone was gentle, and Elias found himself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in years. "You're right. I've been acting like my life ended when theirs did. But here I am, still breathing, still taking up space in the world." "Then do something with that space," Clara said. "Do something that matters." It was Clara who suggested they start small, with one good mare and a quality stud. Elias had the land, the facilities, and the knowledge. What he had lacked was the will. But with Clara's encouragement, he found himself thinking about the future again, making plans, feeling something like hope for the first time in years. Spring came, and with it, the return of life to the land. Elias purchased a pregnant mare, a beautiful chestnut with good bloodlines, and they prepared for the foal's arrival. Clara threw herself into learning everything she could about horse breeding, reading every book Elias owned on the subject, asking questions that showed her sharp mind. The night the foal was born, they stayed up together in the barn, watching and waiting. When the spindle-legged colt finally stood on wobbly legs, Clara laughed with pure joy. a sound so bright and clear that Elias felt something crack open in his chest. He looked at her in the lamplight, her face shining with happiness, and realized that she had become the center of his world. But with that realization came complications. Clara was young enough to be his daughter, and she had come to him through a transaction that shamed him whenever he thought about it. He had no right to feel what he was beginning to feel. More importantly, she deserved better than a bitter old rancher who was using her to fill the emptiness in his life. He began to pull away, becoming more distant, speaking to her only about practical matters. Clara noticed, of course. She was too perceptive not to. But she said nothing, simply continued her work with quiet determination. Then came the day that Matthew Brennan rode up to the ranch. Matthew was the son of a neighboring rancher, 25 years old, handsome and charming, with prospects and a winning smile. He had heard about the new horse breeding operation and wanted to see the foal. But his eyes kept drifting to Clara, who was working in the garden, and Elias saw the young man's interest with a sick feeling in his stomach. Matthew began finding excuses to visit. He would bring gifts, small things like ribbons or sweets, and Clara accepted them with a polite smile. She was kind to Matthew, as she was kind to everyone, but Elias could not tell if there was anything more to it. The thought of losing her, even to a better situation with a younger man, filled him with a desperation he had not felt since Mary died. One evening, after Matthew had left following another visit, Elias found Clara in the barn, brushing down the mare. "He's a good man," Elias said, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Young, with a good future ahead of him. He clearly admires you." Clara did not stop brushing. "He's pleasant enough. You could do worse, a lot worse. He could give you a real life, Clara. A husband, children, a place in society. Not this." He gestured around the barn, meaning more than just the building. Clara set down the brush and turned to face him. "Is that what you want? To be rid of me?" "Of course not. But I want what's best for you. You deserve more than playing housekeeper to a broken-down rancher old enough to be your father. And what if I get to decide what I deserve?" Clara's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "What if I want to stay here with you, building something that matters? What if the life I want is exactly this?" Elias felt the words catch in his throat. "Clara, you're young. You don't understand what you'd be giving up. I understand that I was nothing before I came here. Less than nothing. I was a burden, a thing to be traded away. You looked at me and saw a person worth saving. You gave me a home, yes. But more than that, you gave me a reason to believe I had value. You shared your grief with me, your dreams, your hope. You let me be part of something bigger than just surviving. So don't tell me I don't understand. I understand better than anyone. But people will talk. They'll say I took advantage, that I bought you like property, and then made you into something more. They'll judge you harshly, Clara. They'll say terrible things. Let them talk. I've survived worse than gossip." Clara stepped closer, her face tilted up to his. "I know my own heart, Elias Granger. The question is, do you know yours?" Elias looked down at this remarkable young woman, who had been thrown away by her own family, but had somehow retained her strength, her intelligence, her capacity for joy. She had brought light back into his dead world. She had given him reason to hope, to plan, to live again. And somewhere along the way, without his permission or intention, she had made him love again. "I'm afraid," he admitted quietly. "Afraid that I'm being selfish, that I'm taking something I have no right to take." "You're not taking anything. I'm offering it freely. There's a difference." She reached out and took his hand, rough and calloused from work. "I don't care about the years between us. I don't care what people say. I care about this ranch, these horses, the life we're building. I care about you. If you feel the same, then that's all that matters." Elias pulled her into his arms, feeling her solid warmth against him, and for the first time since Mary died, he allowed himself to fully feel something other than pain. "I do feel the same," he whispered. "Help me, but I do." They were married in a simple ceremony that summer, with only a handful of people in attendance. Some neighbors disapproved, whispering about the age difference and the circumstances of their meeting. But others, particularly the women who had known Elias when Mary was alive, saw the change in him and were glad. He smiled again. He laughed. He engaged with the world instead of merely enduring it. Clara bloomed in ways that went beyond mere happiness. She discovered a natural talent for horse breeding, an instinct for bloodlines and temperament that surprised even Elias. Their small operation began to gain a reputation for quality, and buyers came from across Texas to see their stock. Clara handled the business side with the same sharp intelligence she applied to everything, negotiating deals that were fair but firm. 2 years after their marriage, Clara gave birth to twin girls, sturdy and healthy, with their mother's dark eyes and their father's determination. Elias held his daughters with wonder, these impossible gifts that he had never expected to receive. He was 50 years old, starting over, and it felt like a miracle. But the past never fully releases its grip, and one autumn day, a gaunt woman appeared at their door. It took Elias a moment to recognize her as Sarah Hutchins, Clara's mother. She looked 10 years older than when he had last seen her, worn down by hardship and regret. Clara stood in the doorway, her face carefully neutral, one twin on her hip. "What do you want?" Sarah's voice shook. "I came to see you. To see if the stories were true, that you had married and prospered. To see if you were happy." "I am. No thanks to you? I know what I did was unforgivable. But I was desperate, Clara. Silas, he was drinking more and more, becoming violent. I thought maybe if we could get the livestock, improve the farm, things would get better. Did they?" Clara's tone was cold. "No. He drank away the money Elias gave us, sold one of the cows for more whiskey. He beat me when I objected. I left him 6 months ago, but I have nothing, Clara. I'm living in a boarding house in town, taking in washing to pay for a room, barely big enough to turn around in." Clara studied her mother for a long moment. Elias stood behind her, ready to support whatever decision she made. Finally, Clara spoke. "You traded me away like I was nothing. You looked at me and decided I was worth less than a cow. That's a wound that doesn't heal, Mother. It's always there, even when I'm happy, even when I'm holding my daughters. I feel it." Sarah began to cry, silent tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "I know. I live with that knowledge every day. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to see you once more, to know that you were all right. That something good came from the worst thing I ever did." Clara looked at Elias, and he saw the struggle in her eyes. He stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder, giving her the silent support of his presence. Whatever she decided, he would stand with her. "There's a room above the barn," Clara finally said, her voice tight. "It's small, but it's clean and warm. You can stay there if you want. You'll earn your keep, working where you're needed. But understand this, you're not my mother anymore. Not in any real sense. You're a woman who needs help, and I'm giving it because I'm not the person you were. But don't expect warmth. Don't expect us to be a family. That ship sailed when you handed me over to Silas like property." Sarah nodded, accepting the harsh terms with visible relief. "That's more than I deserve. Thank you." Having Sarah on the ranch was difficult for Clara, but in time the sharp edges of her pain dulled slightly. She never called Sarah mother again, always just Sarah, maintaining that emotional distance. But Sarah worked hard, devoted herself to helping with the twins, and slowly began to rebuild some small measure of trust. One evening, 2 years later, Sarah and Clara were sitting on the porch, watching the twins play in the yard. Elias was in the barn, checking on a mare ready to foal. The air was soft with the promise of spring. "You've built something beautiful here," Sarah said quietly. "I watch you and Elias together, the way you work as partners, the way you've created this life, and I'm proud of you. I know I have no right to that pride, but I feel it anyway." Clara did not respond immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "I used to fantasize about this moment, about you coming back and seeing how wrong you were about me throwing your failure in your face. But now that you're here, now that I have that chance, I find I don't want to. You punished yourself more than I ever could. Every day." Sarah agreed. "Every single day. I'm learning that holding onto anger is like holding onto hot coals. It burns me, not you. So I'm letting it go bit by bit, not for you but for me, for my daughters, so they don't grow up in a house where bitterness lives. Sarah nodded, wiping at her eyes. You're a better woman than I ever was. I'm a woman who was given a chance she didn't expect. Elias saved me, but more than that, he saw me. When the whole world looked at me and saw nothing worth keeping, he looked and saw a person. That changed everything. Elias came out of the barn and walked toward them, his stride easy, a smile on his face. At 54, he looked younger than he had at 42, as though happiness had reversed the aging process. He sat down beside Clara and took her hand, a casual gesture of affection that was as natural as breathing. The mare's doing fine. Should be another few hours at least. Clara leaned against his shoulder, comfortable and content. One of the twins, Eleanor, came running up to the porch, her sister Margaret close behind. They climbed onto their parents' laps, chattering about the baby foal they would get to see soon. Elias listened to their excitement, his face soft with love. As the sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Elias thought about the chain of events that had brought him to this moment. If he had not ridden over to discuss water rights that particular morning, if he had not witnessed Clara's mother trading her away, if he had not felt that unexpected surge of outrage and acted on it, none of this would exist. This life, these children, this second chance at happiness would have remained forever out of reach. Clara had been right when she said he saved her. But the deeper truth was that she had saved him. She had pulled him out of the grave he had been digging for himself with his grief and guilt. She had shown him that life continued, that joy was still possible, that love could bloom even in the most unlikely circumstances. That night, after the girls were asleep and the new foal had been born healthy and strong, Elias and Clara stood in the barn, admiring the gangly creature trying out its legs. Clara leaned against the stall, her face peaceful. Do you ever regret it? Elias asked. Marrying me instead of someone young like Matthew Brennan. Having a normal life. Clara looked at him with those dark eyes that had first captured his heart. I have a normal life, Elias. It's just normal for us, not for other people. And that's exactly how I want it. I'm grateful every day that I rode over to Hutchins's place that morning. And I thank him that you were the kind of man who couldn't stand by and watch injustice without acting. You saw a fat girl being traded for livestock, and instead of turning away like anyone else would have, you stepped in. You gave me dignity when I had none. You gave me a future when mine had been sold away. That's who you are, Elias Granger. That's the man I fell in love with. Elias pulled her close. Breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. We've built something good here, haven't we? We've built something extraordinary. Not just the ranch or the horses or even our daughters, as precious as they are. We've built a life from pieces of broken lives. We took pain and loss and abandonment and somehow made something beautiful from it. That's better than good. That's miraculous. They stood there in the lamplight, two people who had been discarded by fate, but who had found each other anyway, who had chosen to build rather than break, to love rather than isolate, to hope rather than despair. The foal nursed contentedly while its mother looked on with calm eyes. Outside, the Texas night was alive with crickets and the distant call of an owl. The ranch that had been dying was now thriving, full of life and purpose and promise. In the years that followed, the Granger Ranch became known throughout Texas for its horses and for the unusual story of its owners. Clara Granger became a respected figure in her own right, a woman whose business acumen and horse sense were sought after by buyers and breeders alike. The fact that she had once been traded for a cow became a footnote, a strange beginning to a remarkable story rather than a definition of her worth. Elias lived to be 73, long enough to see his daughters grown and starting families of their own, long enough to hold his grandchildren and tell them stories about how their grandmother had changed his life. When he died peacefully in his sleep, Clara mourned him deeply, but without the destructive grief that might have consumed a younger version of herself. She continued running the ranch, expanding the operation, building on the foundation they had created together. Sarah lived out her final years on the ranch, never fully reconciling with the daughter she had betrayed, but finding a kind of peace in being useful, in being part of something good. She died quietly one winter night, and Clara buried her on a hill overlooking the pastures, marking the grave with a simple stone. Whatever anger Clara had carried was gone by then, replaced by a sad acceptance that people are complicated, that desperation drives them to terrible choices, and that forgiveness, even imperfect and incomplete, is better than endless bitterness. The story of Elias and Clara became one of those tales that people told when they wanted to illustrate a point about redemption, about unexpected blessings, about how the worst moments in life can sometimes lead to the best outcomes. It was a reminder that worth is not determined by how others value us, but by what we choose to do with the chances we're given. And on quiet evenings, when Clara sat on the porch of the house she and Elias had built together, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors, she sometimes thought about that October morning when her life had changed. She thought about standing in the yard, being bargained over like livestock, feeling like she had reached the absolute bottom of human experience. She thought about the bitter, broken man who had inexplicably chosen to intervene, who had paid more than she was worth, by any measure her family used, who had brought her to a run-down ranch and offered her something no one else ever had a chance. From that unlikely beginning, from that moment of casual cruelty and unexpected grace, an entire life had blossomed. Not a perfect life, not a life without struggle or sorrow, but a life filled with purpose and meaning and love. The obese girl nobody wanted had become a woman respected across Texas. The broken rancher waiting to die had found reasons to live. Together, they had proved that redemption is always possible. That second chances can come from the most unexpected places, and that the measure of a person is never what they're traded for, but what they choose to become.